Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Trevor Norris. I'm a professor of philosophy of education and political theory in the Faculty of Education at Brock University. And I'm also the director of the Posthumanism Research Institute. Today, we're here to note an important milestone in the history of the Institute. The PRI was founded a decade ago, and we are here today to celebrate this moment and create an opportunity to speak a bit more about the Institute and its history and some related questions. Joining me today is Associate Director Elizabeth Neswald, and she's going to introduce herself.
Yes, hello. I am a professor for the history of science and technology in the history department at Brock University. I've been associate director for about a year and a half now, and I came to the PRI a bit later, so I'm especially looking forward to hearing about its history and the ideas behind it and how it's developed.
Great. All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. Now we'll introduce the PRI founder and first director, Christine Daigle. Christine is a professor of philosophy and interdisciplinary humanities at Brock. She was the founding director of the PRI and the director from 2015 until 2024. She is currently the editor of the journal that's associated with the PRI called Interconnections. She's authored many books, articles, and book chapters on posthumanist theory and environmental posthumanities. I won't list all of them, but please Google her if you'd like to see any more. All right, so thank you for joining us today, Christine, and especially thank you for starting the PRI in the first place. It was a real act of genius, I think, to initiate this and to have a sense of the kind of the growing importance of the field at the time, which was still pretty new 10 years ago, although many of the issues that it addresses were becoming more and more prevalent and contentious. But I think it was very astute to get the idea in the first place. So maybe you could say a little bit about what motivated you to found the Institute and what did you envision?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Trevor, and thank you, Elizabeth. Well, the backstory to the PRI is interesting. I was coming back from sabbatical in January 2014 and met with these graduate students in the PhD program, and they wanted to organize an event, a conference, and then they mentioned Rosie Berdotti, and I said, oh, I know Rosie. And this is how it started, because we then set out to organize this international conference that took place in February 2015, the Thinking Through Deleuze conference, where Rosie was a speaker, a keynote speaker. We had Stephen Shaviro and, oh my God, another speaker whose name I presently forget. But so we had this big conference. It was 3 days, 100 people, presenters and commentators and whatnot. And really, posthumanism was on everybody's mind in some shape or form, even though the title of the conference was not Posthumanism and Deleuze, or it was Thinking Through Deleuze. And so this sort of stayed in our mind, and the project I was working on myself, my research project at the time, was making me look into material feminism, works by Stacey Alamo, Rosie, of course, and other folks like Jane Bennett and whatnot. And when we went to Congress, the now defunct Congress in June 2015, on the drive back, with one of those graduate students, we were sort of talking, because what we realized with the conference is that there were people at Brock from different units, different faculties, interested in posthumanism, doing some kind of work related to posthumanism. And we thought, well, it would be nice to have a venue for people to get together and talk about their work, talk about what they're doing, what they're reading, etc. And so when I got home, I'm like, yeah, that would be really nice. And so I started looking into processes of how to launch a research center or an institute, and because of Brock's internal subtleties, it was better to have an institute because it would gather people from all the different faculties. So I started looking into this whole process, organized a meeting with the vice president research and said, hey, I have this idea. Can we make it happen? How do I do this? And I started thinking about funding because I'm a serial grant applicant. And I was like, okay, what kind of money can we get to support this, support activities, and eventually support growth, right? So I had this plan that was sort of forming, and this is how we, with colleagues, Andrew Pendakis and Stefan Dolgert, we took this proposal to Senate, and it was approved in December 2015. So, and then we started, organizing meetings. We had our first General Assembly of Members in the spring that followed, and then we just started collecting ideas from folks who became members. It was a small group, and then started to think about what we wanted to do, and that's just how we got started. So yeah, I mean, I can't say I had a vision for what it became, because what it became far exceeds what I had envisioned. But my main intention really was to have a space of some sort where folks could meet, talk, and share ideas and develop these ideas.
Well, I think in that regard has been quite an accomplishment. Okay, Elizabeth is going to lead us on the next question.
Yes, thanks so much, Christine, for that bit of the history. In your response, you said that it's become something other than you envisioned, and I was curious as to how you've seen it change over the years and develop and become what it is now.
Yeah, that's really interesting to look at the evolution of the PRI, because what started off as a small group of folks at Brock soon expanded and attracted a lot of attention, and we started attracting a lot of members from outside of Brock, from other Ontario universities, and then Canadian universities, and then internationally. And that was not something I had foreseen. It was much welcome because it spoke to the widespread interest there is in posthumanist theory, posthumanist approaches. And I think we were kind of maybe filling a gap. People were looking for a place to be connected with other folks working on posthumanism. And we came around, and so it gave an opportunity for folks to be connected and get information and participate and whatnot. So that was something that started happening within 1 or 2 years of the PRI's inception. And like I said, we started with a small group, and then the last time I checked, we're now over 100 members. With folks from across the world and folks also at various stages of their careers. This is something I'm really happy with, is that we have a mix of people. We have a diversity of people, graduate students, early career faculty members, more established people. So it's an interesting mix. And also, I should say, as we were beginning this kind of early expansion, with my colleague Russ Kilbourne from Wilfrid Laurier, we also formed a partnership, and we applied for this large grant that is offered by SSHRC, Partnership Development Grant, which we got to support our activities from 2017 to 2020. So that gave us the occasion to organize, speaker series, workshops, conferences, and then we had people come from all kinds of different places to these workshops. We had a keynote speaker. The one year we had an event at Laurier with Patricia McCormack as our keynote speaker that came in from the UK. So all of these activities continued to attract attention, and then more people wanting to get involved or become members and be informed about our activities. And I think also what was interesting to me beyond that external collaboration and building connections with other groups worldwide that work on posthumanism, we also formed connections within BROC. So we have this collaboration going on with the Environmental Sustainability Research Center. We also collaborated with a theater company from Montreal that was looking to stage their next show. The theater company is called Posthumanism. So we worked together with them. So it's been interesting to just, connect with a variety of people and to launch different initiatives as well, right? So there's been, I think, a proliferation on the part of members in terms of launching initiatives, launching different types of publications, different types of research projects. I'll use this opportunity to advertise the Posthumanism in Practice series that we launched at Bloomsbury. So it's a book series. So these kinds of things, they have sort of emerged out of the growth of the PRI and its reach.
I think that's really exciting to hear all of the ways in which the Institute functions as a catalyst to initiate all sorts of other initiatives. And I would just add that in addition to a wide range of career stages of its members and its global reach, it's also been quite striking to see the wide range of academic fields that are attracted to the Institute. I mean, just about every field I can think of, as well as those that are even outside of academia. Like we have working psychoanalysts, we have lawyers, we have filmmakers. What's kind of quite extraordinary about the field of posthumanism is the wide reach. It's quite a unique area of study because for that reason. So that may transition to our next question, which is how do you think the field of posthumanism has been changing over the years?
Yes, so the changes that I have seen, and you're referring to it as a field, and that I think that's good because it certainly is not a discipline or even a subdiscipline, even though it did emerge sort of within continental philosophy. To me, this is more of a theoretical framework, or is it even a worldview? Because if we're saying that posthumanism is responding to humanism, humanism certainly can claim the status of a worldview. And so is posthumanism offering a counter worldview, and it changes the way in which we think about the various problems and questions that the different disciplines are tackling in certain disciplinary ways. So I think that's posthumanism, if it is this kind of theoretical framework that can permeate all kinds of different areas. We were talking about members from many different disciplines, right? It does have this kind of reach. It is as potent in philosophy as it is in education, in natural sciences, in biology, in business even. So there's this capacity to this new mode of thinking, new mode of asking questions, new modes of inquiry to be transformative of these disciplines and disciplinary practices as well, which was why we were interested in launching the Posthumanism in Practice series, was to see how this works exactly and how it transforms things. So there's, and one important thing that has been occurring, so beyond what posthumanism does and how it exists out there, one very important thing that has been firmly established by now is the distinction between a critical posthumanist perspective and a transhumanist perspective. I think 10 years ago, there was still much confusion about that. partly because a lot of critical posthumanists are interested in thinking about our interconnections with technology. And so if you're talking about technology and cyborgs and AI, are you a transhumanist or a posthumanist? And many transhumanists have claimed for themselves the label posthumanist. So there's been a lot of work done in terms of making that distinction very clear. For example, through publications like Rosie Berdotti's Posthuman Trilogy, the publication of Posthumanism in Practice Volume 1, the 2 posthuman glossaries that were published, as well as various edited collections that have shown how posthumanism as a theoretical framework can be relevant and generative for a good number of disciplines and practices, and doing so not in a transhumanist perspective. So that is really important. So I'd say these are the major changes I've seen, and also I think probably the ongoing development of alternative methods for doing research, for writing, for communicating research, different research practices. Again, trying to move away from disciplinary standards and disciplinary practices, and pushing the post-disciplinarity in the direction of not just the number of fields that are, or disciplines that are being impacted, but also the methods that people use to do their work and, create those new ideas. So those are the changes I think that have been major over the last years.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's quite striking and quite unusual that a field would be, or if not a field, maybe there's better terms for it, but that is sometimes conflated with its opposite. There's such a tension between posthumanism and transhumanism, but sometimes people think they're either advocating for the same thing or based on similar, underlying principles.
Christine, thanks so much for telling us about the changes you've seen in posthumanism over the years. And I was wondering what you think the most important questions it needs to address would be, the things that are, I guess, the most important issues that can be approached from a posthumanist perspective now.
That is a great question. And my answer to that is really directly related to what I am currently working on. So in some ways, it's going to be my answer, but there could be more answers. So, and other folks working on other projects would have equally valid answers to that question. So, but what I do think is essential at this moment is to bring a posthumanist theoretical framework to environmental issues. Yes, we're living at a moment of polycrisis, environmental, political, social, health crisis. I'm forgetting a few. But the environmental crisis is one that really permeates a lot of the other issues, and it is really essential to bring a posthumanist perspective to tackling those issues. And why I think that is because if we keep thinking about environmental issues in terms of, sustainability, for example, the whole discourse about sustainability, if you look at the SDGs, the UNESCO's SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, everything is framed in terms of how to serve the human and how to serve future generations of humans. So we're not looking into figuring out better practices for the sake of the more than human. And I think that recent history has shown that this doesn't yield the results that some folks might have been hoping for. And so I do think that if we introduce a posthumanist perspective in those questions and think about those problems differently, we might come up with, no pun intended, more sustainable solutions to the current problems. So I think it is really important to recalibrate how we think ourselves, how we insert ourselves in the world, instead of trying to figure out how we can continue merely exploiting and extracting resources so that we can continue to thrive at the cost of other beings thriving, and also at the cost of some humans thriving as well, right? So as long as we're going to hold on to human exceptionalism and hierarchies of beings, we're not going to move forward in any kind of constructive way, I think. So a lot of my work has to do with that. And I think we also need to bring posthumanist principles and theories to the social political crises worldwide, because, once you embrace hierarchical ways of thinking, once you start establishing a certain type of being as exceptional, fantastic, different from and above others, you're generating all kinds of problems, oppression, violence, inequities, and ideologies that want to support the thriving of exclusive groups of humans at the cost of that of others. And so I think that's, for me, those would be the two most pressing areas that need posthumanist attention. And in order to shift the way in which we think of the different beings that are in relation, and how we can possibly embrace a relational ethics of care, and infuse our decision making with regards to social and political issues, but also environmental issues, with such a perspective. It's interesting. I was just teaching critical posthumanism fourth year undergrad class, and we had an in-class activity the one week. We had been reading Haraway's Staying with the Trouble, and I put them in small teams, and I asked them to design their child of compost. So to determine what should be retained of the human, what should be acquired, and what should be dismissed. And what was really interesting is they came up with all kinds of nice ideas, but the one recurring theme was that of compassion and empathy. The need to retain and augment compassion and empathy. So in relation to this notion of a relational ethics of care, right? So I thought it was really interesting to see that all the children of compost had this characteristic as a fundamental one, as something they considered to be essential.
Thanks. I like what that implies. So your vision implies, because it's that caring for the non-human is the fundamental basis of caring for the human. You can't have any kind of human social justice, social equity, without the non-human also being a part of the picture. So empathy for all is crucial.
Yeah, it's the necessity to have a circulation of care. But also, I'm always reminded when I think about this of Maria Puig de la Bellacas's argument that there's always going to be a non-reciprocal circulation of care. For example, the worms that care for us by doing what they do in the soil, they do so, and our care toward them takes a different form. We may have more responsibility and moral responsibility, because we have a different kind of response ability, and so thinking about all of that, right? I think it's really fundamental, and it can be taken to any number of current issues that we're facing. So not just the social, political, and environmental, but also other kinds of crises that we're faced with.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I think that points to many significant contributions of posthumanism. The notion of rethinking sustainability in less anthropocentric manners, for example, and the ways in which posthumanism can potentially contribute to addressing some of our various crises. So this is kind of the broader impacts, but I wonder if you can just briefly speak about, as a founder of PRI and someone who from the early years was quite interested in the field, the direction that your own personal research has been going in, and some of the publication initiatives you're involved in, like the book series you mentioned and the journal interconnections that you edit.
Well, I mean, the great benefit to me of the PRI has been the opportunity to engage with as many people as I have, working with them, developing initiatives, being confronted with different ways of thinking, posthumanism, critical posthumanism. What is it? What does it do? What can it do? So having all of these conversations and collaborations with folks, co-authoring, co-editing, has been really fantastic. It has really fueled my thinking, and it has led me to, I wouldn't say it led me to entirely new pathways, because I had been interested in a lot of these questions before, but certainly the way I'm thinking about these questions has been transformed by these opportunities of connecting with people and how they're thinking about these questions and issues. So this engagement with scholars, and again, scholars at various stages, and scholars in different parts of the world who are looking at things differently, right? And having the opportunity to learn from people and really inform my thinking in new ways. That has been really valuable. And so all of these various interactions, I think one thing that has been one thing that for me in my work has changed quite a lot in the last 10 years, and I'm quite thankful for, is I've been able to kind of move away from my disciplinary training in philosophy that expects that you write a certain way, that you put your paper a certain way, that you develop your arguments a certain way, all of these disciplinary shackles, if you wish. And I've sort of freed myself from that and been engaged in more experimental, tentative, creative, speculative ways of developing ideas and even writing. In my last book, the Posthumanist Vulnerability book, I have these theoretical chapters, but I also have these meandering sections where I talk about personal experiences, encounters, and it's more of a storytelling or poetic reflection on things, right? Something I would never have thought of doing 15 years ago, because this is not a disciplinary expectation that you will do your work in this kind of way. So that I'm very thankful for, because I think it has, I want to say it has made me less rigid about how to do the work, which is very generative. I mean, one thing I like when first time I read Staying with the Trouble from Haraway is her whole use of Marilyn Strayton's sentence, it matters what thoughts, now I forget the exact quote because I'm never good at quoting exactly, but it matters what thoughts think thoughts. And then Haraway has these old variations on this, right? What matters, and et cetera, et cetera. And it does, if you're going to have new ideas, and you keep playing with the same methods and the same concepts, how are you going to come up with these new ideas? So that for me has been a major change in how I approach my work and my thinking. And maybe it's the privilege of a full professor who can engage in these kinds of experimentation. But I think the more space we give to early career scholars and graduate students to engage in these modes of research and research creation, the more new ideas we'll have, and the more the field will continue to advance.
Yeah, I think that's one of the exciting things about posthumanism is the way in which it connects with how research itself is undertaken. And I think there's a broadening of possibilities that happens as a result. And we see the emergence of things like research creation. And in your journal, you mentioned you have research, you have reflective pieces and poetic experiments that seems to kind of align quite nicely with posthumanism. So for the next question, we'll go to Elizabeth.
Yeah, so looking back at your 10 years with the PRI and everything that you've organized and all the work you've done, I wanted to ask what are you most proud of with the Institute and with your work with that?
I think the one, if I have to isolate one thing, I would say the support we have been able to offer to early career scholars, and I include graduate students in that group. There are not many places where you can engage in this kind of research if you are a graduate student. At Brock, we have the fortune of having the PhD in interdisciplinary humanities, where students can pursue projects that have posthumanist leanings to them. And I had not foreseen that this would be such a generative synergy when we launched the PRI. But students come to the program and with these kinds of projects, and they become members of the PRI, and they find a space where the kind of disciplinary limitations I was talking about earlier sort of fall on the wayside. Not to say that we're not training them in disciplinary fashions, but there's also opportunities to do things differently and develop their ideas. So that I'm really proud of. And we've also made a point throughout the years of when we were selecting speakers for our speaker series, for example, to make space for less established people, because there's a tendency to always invite the big people who have a few books under their belt, and we see them everywhere, and we want to listen to them and we want to read them. But there's also all kinds of new funky ideas emerging, and they need a venue where they can be disseminated. And so through our efforts, whenever we have organized speaker series or workshops, conferences, we have made space for these emerging ideas from emerging people. And I think that this is really important to do, because it can be difficult for early career folks to make their space and get their ideas discussed and spread out, right? So that I think is something that I can be proud of. That's been quite successful as well, I think.
Yeah, I think what's great about the Institute is the extent to which we have many junior scholars involved and PhD students. And that's also driven the focus of the Institute as well, because it's such a new field that it's kind of being driven in many ways by newer, younger scholars. And so that's really important as well. So a last question for you today would be, where do you hope the PRI might go in the future? And where do you hope it might be at its next big birthday?
Well, where exactly is not really for me to say. in launching the PRI, I was really interested in responding to what members wanted the PRI to be and to do. I've always been this kind of bottom-up person, and through my years as director, I always asked members and the executive what they were aspiring to and tried my best to respond to that. So I think it will become what people want it to become. And I mean, more generally, of course, I do hope that the PRI continues to thrive. It's doing well, and I think it will continue to do well. If there's anything I would like to see developed, and it can be challenging, but I think it is possible, and we've been working toward that, is to have even more international collaborations and connections. It would be great, for example, to connect with folks in Asia and Africa who work on posthumanism and may have their own research groups with whom we could connect. And you know, to see how posthumanism is making its way in these parts of the world. And why I say it can be challenging is sometimes because there seems to be these kinds of bubbles where you have North American academe, European academe, and then South America, and you know, and sometimes there are language barriers as well. People do not necessarily do their work in the lingua franca that English has become. And so there are some challenges to achieving that, but I think this is something that would be really nice to see concretized. And we do have members from these different parts. It's a matter of further investigating these connections. And but what activities exactly will unfold? I don't know. That will be up to members to determine. The journal is doing well. I mean, that's another thing I'm proud of, by the way, where we just published the 8th issue a week ago. So issue 4.2 came out. So yeah, I mean, I hope this continues, the journal, the PRI, the different activities. But again, I do think it needs to continue to be member driven and responding to what folks want and what responds well to how their work is developing and how it can help them form connections and collaborations and find venues for dissemination of their ideas. Yeah.
All right, that's great. I think there's lots of possibilities for the Institute in the future. We do have some, let me use this as a moment to let our viewers know that we do have some events coming up this current week, actually, and then in several events in the winter. So keep your eye on the homepage or the social media, or if you're not an affiliate and therefore receiving our newsletters, then please consider joining us. Yeah, and we're continuing with a potential reading group in the winter. We did a reading group a year ago on Marx and the Anthropocene, which included about 20 participants from around the world in many disciplines, and that led to an event in Venice at a conference, Marx and the Anthropocene Conference, and we just found out that we now have a special issue coming out that will include the participants of the reading group. And we're having conversations about a reading group on psychoanalysis and posthumanism, or artificial intelligence and posthumanism, which could also lead to special issues and further publications. In the winter, we have a large event we're planning on the concept of the Anthropocene and the discussions that happened in the Anthropocene Working Group regarding the adoption of that word, and the vote that went negatively on that topic. So we'll have a conversation about that in the winter. So please keep your eye on future events in the future for the PRI. I don't know if Elizabeth or Christine, you want to add anything else?
I think I've talked a lot.
I enjoyed listening to you, Christine. It was really nice hearing more in depth the history of the Institute and your plans, and also your work and your work plans. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I also just want to say, as I did in the beginning, that I think it was quite indicator of quite extraordinary initiative and forward-thinking mentality to come up with this idea in the first place to establish the Institute. And you were the director for quite some time, and accomplished quite a bit during that and even after you stepped down. So I think it's, Brock has benefited from your leadership and initiative, and I think it's great to think of the directions the Institute may go in the future. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for starting the PRI in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you both.